Welcome to another episode of our video series of the mechanics of human cognition.
It's good to be back.
Yeah.
How has your week been? Hopefully not too distracting.
You know, it's funny you say that. It's been intensely distracting, actually. All future-focused anxiety, deadlines, bills, that constant low-level hum of needing to prepare.
Ah, yes. The pressure cooker.
Exactly. And that feeling, that stress, it leads us right into the heart of what we're talking about today. It's this cognitive dilemma that I think really vexes a lot of people.
Especially younger people, I'd imagine.
For sure. It's this zero-sum game we play in our heads. Should I be rigorously saving, investing, building for some secure future self?
Or do I just prioritize living my life right now in this present moment?
And it feels like you can't do both. It feels like one has to win.
It really does. It's a fundamental tension, isn't it? Between the needs of your current self and this imagined future self. We're sort of wired to do both survive now, but also plan for winter.
It's a balancing act that I think for most of us ends in failing at both.
I think you're right.
I'll be the first to admit I lean heavily into the now side of things. My weakness is systematic planning. I kind of tell myself I'm trusting the process, but really, it's just a fancy way of saying I don't use my preparedness muscle enough.
Which, cognitively speaking, is a flaw. It leaves you vulnerable.
A huge flaw. And it comes from this basic misunderstanding of what living in the moment even means.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The popular idea is so warped. When you say that phrase to someone, their mind almost always jumps to hedonism.
Yes. A very expensive, very visible kind of hedonism. Our sources really hit on this. Living the moment gets translated into consumption, right?
Right. Intoxication, luxury spending. It means maxing out the credit card on, I don't know, a fancy dinner in Istanbul or something.
Endless parties, the newest phone. That's the image.
But we need to really analyze what's happening there cognitively. If you're consuming that intensely, you're not actually in the moment.
You're escaping it.
You're escaping it.
Yeah.
You're using these high-cost distractions for a bit of temporary relief, we can almost call it, numbing the moment.
That's good. Numbing the moment.
You're just trying to get away from whatever discomfort you feel now, hoping the next moment, the one you just paid for, will feel better.
And that is an incredibly expensive form of avoidance. You're trading today's actual money for tomorrow's very temporary, very artificial comfort.
Plus, there's a multiplier effect. An hour of focused work or a focused conversation like this one costs nothing. An hour of celebratory consumption can cost a fortune.
So what's the alternative? What is the real moment?
Well, the true definition, the one we should be working with, is what you could call mindful presence. And it's not about enjoyment, not primarily.
Okay.
It's about conscious awareness. Just the recognition of what is actually happening, what is real, without trying to judge it or change it.
Cognitively, that makes perfect sense. I mean, the future is just an abstraction. It's a guess.
A complete guess.
Yeah.
And the past is.
Yeah.
It's just a memory file. And a very flawed one at that. Highly edited.
So the only thing that's actually real is this tiny sliver of existence, this, 1 to 3 second window, the length of a breath. That's it.
That's the whole game. And here's the paradox we wanted to get to. When you truly live in that tiny window, in that state of conscious awareness, it automatically makes you frugal.
How so?
Think about it. If you are totally immersed in what you're doing right now, this conversation, for example, or learning a new skill, or even just sitting quietly, the need for some external material thing to make you feel okay adjusting, it drops to zero.
You get that sense of what the philosophers called has that deep enjoyment just from the focus itself. No spending required.
Exactly. And since time is the one thing you can never, ever get back, valuing the present moment's awareness is the highest form of saving there is. It's the ultimate return on your cognitive investment.
That completely reframes the whole financial picture.
It does. And if we look at the psychology of why we spend, it gets even clearer. Neuromarketing research is pretty much unanimous on this.
Spending is almost never about what we think it's about.
Almost never. It's driven by one of two things, usually. Either you're trying to fill some perceived hole, some lack, or trauma from your past.
Or you're anxiously trying to buy security for the future. You're trying to guarantee it.
It's a transaction born from a feeling of deficit, not abundance.
This makes me think of that amazing piece of research, the pause test.
Oh, yes. The results of that are just stunning.
Tell us about it.
Well, it's simple. You take a consumer who's about to make an impulsive, non-essential purchase, expensive shoes, a new gadget.
The stuff we all buy.
The stuff we all buy. And you just ask them to pause for 2 minutes. And in that 2 minutes, they have to consciously ask themselves, Do I really need this? Why?
And the result.
Over 90% of those purchases are canceled. Just abandoned.
Wow, 90% just from a 2-minute pause.
It's a total cognitive game changer. That little pause forces your brain to switch gears. You go from that fast, emotional, automatic System 1 thinking.
Which is what marketing is designed to trigger.
Exactly. To the slow, rational, prefrontal, cortex-driven System 2. System 1 is screaming, buy this, it'll fix your boredom.
And System 2 calmly asks, okay, but what problem is this actually solving and what am I giving up to get it?
And that's usually all it takes. The realization that it's just a temporary distraction, a little opiate that breaks the spell.
Okay, but let's pivot for a second. What about the other extreme? The person who saves everything, the person who avoids all spending.
The extreme saver.
We all know someone like this. They deny themselves basic things. They live with their parents into their 30s or 40s just to minimize every possible risk and cost. And yet, they're often deeply unhappy, stagnant.
This is such a critical distinction to make. That's not frugality. That is being, for lack of a better term, stingy toward life.
Stingy toward life. I like that.
They're confusing avoidance with wisdom. But any kind of growth, personal, professional, financials, it requires taking some calculated risks. It requires the discomfort of stepping outside your comfort zone.
If you avoid all risk, you're essentially being lazy. You're not willing to engage with the world as it is.
And stagnation is the only possible outcome of that, financially and personally.
It's still a non-conscious behavior, isn't it? Just like impulsive spending.
It's the other side of the same coin.
Yeah.
And it often connects to this really deep cultural programming we have around money. You mentioned your own story from when you were younger.
Right. My first real paycheck back in '97. I spent the entire thing on, I think it was an Iron Maiden 10 cassette box set.
A worthy cause.
A worthy cause, for sure. But when I really think about it, the act wasn't about savoring music. It was this weirdly desperate need to just burn the money, get rid of it.
So it was a reaction, not a conscious choice.
It was completely automatic. It came from this underlying guilt or worthlessness I felt about having money. This cultural idea that, less sorrow with little wealth. If you believe money brings problems, you get rid of it before it can cause any.
And that is the absolute opposite of mindful presence. Presence means you are consciously deciding where your resources, your time, your attention, your money should go. The second that process becomes automatic, driven by fear or guilt, you're not in the present anymore.
You're letting your past or your culture run the show.
But the real test of presence, I think, is when the moment isn't pleasant.
Right. It's not just about savoring sunsets. The true moment, it includes everything.
Everything. The pain of a setback,
Yeah.
the frustration of being stuck in traffic, the stress of feeling like no one is listening to you.
So how does being present help with that? With actual suffering?
Well, it allows you to manage it by separating two different things.
Yeah.
We need to distinguish between pain, or aken, as it's called in some philosophical traditions, and suffering, or azdarap.
Okay, what's the difference?
Pain is the raw data. It's the sensory input, the physical sensation, the difficult external event. It's just what is.
And suffering?
Suffering is the mental layer you add on top of it. It's the story you tell about the pain.
It's the why me.
Exactly. It's the why me, the I wish I hadn't done that thing in the past, or the when is this ever going to end? All of that is past or future oriented. It's not actually happening in the real moment.
It's a projection.
It's pure projection. And if you can just focus intensely on what is happening to my body right now, all those mental stories, all that regret and anxiety, they just lose their grip.
You don't have the cognitive bandwidth for them.
You don't. You get pushed into a state that's very similar to what we call flow or a kush. Your mind is just fully absorbed in processing the now.
And that focus, that has social implications too, doesn't it?
Huge implications. When an individual becomes more internally stable through this kind of presence, their material needs just naturally start to shrink. You're not trying to fill a hole inside yourself anymore.
So you start looking outward.
You start looking for ways to create value externally. This is like an evolutionary dividend of presence. Being useful to others, mentoring, helping your community, simple acts of generosity. It's a cognitive shortcut to happiness.
The brain rewards you for it.
Instantly. It's like a little fireworks display of positive neurochemicals.
Yeah.
So this impulse to be beneficial, or fidali olmak, is a natural outcome of being truly present.
This also dramatically changes our relationship with time itself, with memory.
It really does. Think about your memories, the events you can recall clearly from years ago. Why do you remember those things?
Because they were emotionally charged. Something happened that really jumped out.
It triggered your emotional system, which basically hit the record button. We estimate that the vast majority of life, maybe 80% of it, is lived on. Let's call it automatic pilot.
The daily commute, eating lunch while scrolling on your phone.
All of it.
Oh.
We don't consciously register the details, and because those autopilot times aren't recorded as distinct memories, time just compresses.
Which is why people get to 60 and feel like it all went by in a flash.
Because they only actually remember the handful of moments when they were truly, intensely, consciously alive.
And that creates this danger of what we could call retrospective living.
Explain that.
It's when you get stuck savoring a powerful past memory. You think about the incredible joy of your child's birth, that first word they said.
And it's a beautiful memory.
A beautiful memory. But by reliving it over and over, you're missing the reality of that person now. The 23-year-old in front of you, who needs you to be present for a new conversation.
The past becomes a barrier to creating new present moments.
Exactly. And this brings us all the way back to the financial world, specifically to the critique of modern speculation.
Day trading, crypto, leveraged stocks.
The whole system.
Yeah.
Cognitively, these things function as both an illusion and a drug.
It's an illusion because it promises this massive return without any real value creation. And it's a drug because it hijacks your entire brain. It pulls you completely out of the present.
You become addicted to the next moment.
You are living in a chronic state of next. The next chart update, the next news alert, the next trade. Your life becomes a waiting game.
And you have to ask yourself a very basic question. If you make a huge amount of money from that kind of speculation, where did that value actually come from?
Right. It's often a zero-sum game. For you to have a massive sudden gain, someone else often has to have a massive sudden loss.
Yeah.
It's built on instability.
The fundamental principle, the one that holds true over time, is that real stable value comes from the labor of one's hands.
From the conscious, focused effort of creating something, providing a service, mastering a skill.
Any big financial return you get without that effort, without that real contribution, it's temporary. It's just a matter of time.
The system is governed by a kind of reciprocity or mutabiliyet. If you take a lot of value out without putting any in, the system will eventually balance itself. You don't get to keep what you didn't truly earn through effort and presence.
So to bring this all together, the emotional satisfaction you get from being mindfully present is actually the single greatest, most guaranteed investment you can make.
It's the only one with zero capital cost and infinite dividends.
It automatically cuts your unnecessary spending, it guarantees you create high-quality memories, and maybe most importantly, it increases the perceived length and richness of your life.
That's the key. Don't sacrifice today, the only thing you actually have, for a tomorrow that is, at best, a complete unknown.
As one thinker put it, conscious thought might not make you money, but it will absolutely save you a fortune in unnecessary expenses.
So we want to leave you with a final thought, a challenge. If being truly present naturally reduces your material needs and makes you want to be more helpful to others,
Then take a hard look at your own spending. Ask yourself, how much of it is about real present fulfillment, and how much is just you buying an expensive ticket to some imaginary future moment of comfort or status?
and here's the ultimate test of presence. Think about yesterday. Just sit quietly and think about it. How many minutes of that day can you vividly, consciously recall having lived?
Not the autopilot time, not the scrolling or the worrying.
The minutes where you felt completely unequivocally there. That number, whatever it is, that's the true measure of your life's quality.
A powerful way to look at it. Thank you for this. A fascinating look at the mechanics behind it all.
My pleasure. Always a great conversation.